Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you're all well. And ahead of this week's poem, I thought I'd just give you guys a quick sort of call to attention. Thank you very, very much for everybody that has been listening to the episodes recently. I've seen a big spike in numbers, which has been wonderful, and really, really lovely as well to see people listening from all over the world, which makes me feel quite strange that my voice is being broadcast to some of these places, but that's the beauty of podcasting, I guess. And in terms of publicity, a couple of things coming up. The first thing is I've been interviewed twice now on BBC Radio, a couple of local things via the Upload. One of them was with Hannah Sackville-Bryant via Radio York. That's the most recent episode before this one, so do give that a listen. Had a really good chat with her about why I'm doing this and what it all means, and I hope that was illuminating for anybody that's wanting to get to know a bit more about me. And in terms of other stuff, I've got a couple of articles coming out fairly soon about not just the podcast but about me. I will have an article in the Philip Larkin magazine called About Larkin, where it's mostly focusing on what I did this summer, where I was doing their sort of Joe Riley Presents mini-series, which is the prototype of sketch poetry. So if you get an opportunity to get your hands on that, or the online version, I'll post a link to it somewhere in the show notes when I can find it. And in terms of other things, on a much more parochial level, I am being featured in the Hook Focus magazine, which is a local magazine for residents of Hook and Newnham and Greywell and all that stuff down here in North East Hampshire. Probably a bit harder to get your hands on one of those, but definitely if you are a local and you want to sort of hear a bit more about the podcast and sort of read about it in print, that will be there as well. The final bit really is a call to sort of attention, a call to action. One thing I'd love you to do, if at all possible, is if you are listening to this right now and you are a fan of what I've been doing, then for goodness sake, please do like and subscribe. Make sure that you do that as a minimum. That just gives me knowledge that every time I release something, you are getting it directly. And please go one further and do give a review. I've had one review so far, and as I know, it's hard to find the time, but whatever podcast app you use, whatever situation you find yourself in when you're listening to it, please go. Give it the stars you think it deserves. Write a nice comment. It just helps me get noticed and it helps me get pushed up. And if you are interested, of course, in supporting the show even further, there is a paid option in which you can request a poem directly, and we can do an entire feature on it, which I hope is to your taste. That way I feel it gives me direct listenership, sort of engagement, and if for some reason you're not in a position to pay anything towards it, but you really want to feature a poem, please just send me an email. I am thesketchpoet@gmail.com. I don't want price to be a reason why people don't engage with the podcast. That would be completely against my principles. So please like, subscribe, review, get in touch, but most of all, please just keep listening. And as far as the sort of order of the day goes, it's a really very blustery day here in Hook. The weather warning has been in place now for about 48 hours. The tail end of some really, really bad weather, especially further up the country, Scotland way. The Great South Run has had to be postponed, which is very, very sad news. I ran it myself some years ago. I wish they postponed it then. It was absolutely horrendous. Coming back down along South Sea front for the last mile or two was absolutely crazy. So, but if you are a runner and you've done the training and this was your big event of the year, my heart goes out to you, and I hope it gets postponed rather than cancelled. But in any case, it's the weather up here has kind of blown through a little bit and left us with this bright but breezy late afternoon. And I'm just coming through my usual sort of spot here. I will take you guys on a different walk at some point fairly soon, I hope. But it's been difficult finding the time recently. So today I'm channeling all things autumn, all things Halloween. And I'm going to talk a lot about all of that before I get to any poems. I hope that's okay. If you are obsessed only with the poem and you just want to hear that, feel free to skip ahead. But for the rest of you, strap in. It's going to get a little bit spooky around here. So I'm going to preface everything I say here with the warning that I have become, over the past sort of maybe 15 to 20 years, much more interested in horror, ghosts, uncanny, whatever you want to call it. But I am at heart a great big scaredy cat. I find all of this stuff terrifying. I don't believe in it necessarily, as in I don't think that when you die your spirit comes back from the dead to haunt people as such. I think the dead outnumber the living by quite a large ratio, so if that were true then we're all screwed. But I love the idea of it. I find the concept of, the beyond really interesting. It's why I'm interested in poetry. You've only got to read what many, many, many wonderful writers and artists and philosophers have said about it over centuries to realise that it's quite a nice unifier, that it doesn't matter what era you live in, we're all interested in what lies beyond. And none more so than at this time of year, which the Celts used to call Samhain, the traditional time of year when the sort of veil, if you like, between the living and the dead was at its thinnest and at its most vulnerable. So if you're a fan of things like the Uncanny podcast with the marvellously talented half man, half elf, half bottle brush guy Danny Robbins, who's an excellent podcaster and probably the nicest guy in show business in my humble opinion. If you've never heard the Uncanny podcast or the Battersea Poltergeist or even his early stuff, Haunted, stop what you're doing right now, stop listening to me, go back and listen to those, and be aware you will need new underwear by the end of it. Can poetry be scary? It's a good question, because I think about all things that have frightened me in all different mediums over the years, and I just go, I don't know if it can be. But then I think about how it isn't necessarily that Halloween is scary, everything has to be horrific. It can be eerie, it can be unsettling. To bring this week's poem into it a little bit, I think it's the idea of, at the turn of the seasons, and especially this sort of time of year where we really do see that slip from any kind of summery weather into, now we are pretty much there, into autumn, getting ready for winter. The changing of it and the change of the light, especially for me, is a big sort of trigger that makes me think about the idea of, ends and sort of finality. I also think about the way in which this time of year there is something lovely about the comforting nature of sitting inside in the warm with a warm drink and sort of listening to the wind howl outside. As human beings, we've got used to this idea that we can sort of protect ourselves from the outside a little bit. But this is not a podcast of sitting indoors. I've sort of said to myself about 90% of my episodes are going to be done outside, or at the very least, inside and then outside. I'd like to be out amongst it, and where I am right now is my usual spot, but there's something very, very different about it right now, because it is sundown. And autumnal sundowns are some of my favourites because they happen earlier and earlier, and the sunlight takes on this gorgeous orange-red sort of russet colour. It makes me just think of, lots of things, some of them spooky, some of them not. But I always remember
loving autumn as a kid. And to sort of take you back a little bit, the idea of Halloween, I love the fact that now it is very, very much in vogue. And, the kids I teach all are really into Halloween, even if they're a little bit older. It's become cool to like that kind of thing. When I was growing up, it was distinctly uncool. It was distinctly, if you got involved in Halloween, it was very it might be seen as a bit kitsch, and that was it. I think people like autumn. Autumn is it's a really interesting time of year. It's a time of year that we've all started to learn to love, even if it's just because we love our pumpkin spice lattes and things like that. There's something very wholesome about it, but also something about the earth. And I think this is where, if you take any festival, any sort of time of year back to its roots, you got to ask it, what does it do for the people? I think about the way in which we think about things like even Christmas. The idea of it being Saturnalia. The Romans would have really latched on to whatever people were already doing. And then when they became Christian, let's call it Christmas. Nice rebranding. But the idea that at different times of the year we try to find things to be cheerful about. And of course, this time of year, really traditionally, the big thing is harvest. So the earth, you could say giving something back, or you could say being plundered, having something taken from it. Maybe that sense of we as humans have learned we can live on the earth and we can take from the earth. But a bad harvest is, and was, a matter of life or death, really. So as I trudge through mud and puddles down here, I can smell in this sort of slightly musky odour of, mud and water and spoiled blackberries. I actually did a big round of blackberry picking the other day, and as well as the sloe bushes down here. I got all my sloes in as well for making a bit of winter infused sloe gin and blackberry vodka. Bit of a tradition here in the Riley household. But I'm no farmer, and I look across the cornfields and I see them having been all now chopped down and harvested. But again, it's that reminder of every year, every cycle, something moves, something changes, and yet you can also set your watch by it, because humans have always needed this stuff to get by. So the poem I'm actually going to do today is one that I hadn't heard of before, but I will give props to the wonderful Jim Moon of the Hypnagoria podcast. Now, this guy is something of a legend in podcasting circles. He's been going, I believe, since about 2010, and he has one of the longest running sort of horror and folklore, I think would be fair to say, are his sort of two specialties. Sort of horror and folklore podcasts. He covers everything: films, literature, radio, you name it. Jim has done it, and done it a lot better than me. And I actually wrote to him. He gave me a nice list of his favourite poems for this time of year. And there's quite a few. There's ones that I'd love to do, but I don't quite know yet if I can get the setting just right. But one that really came to mind, especially on a day like today, was one by Louise Glück, and I hope I've pronounced her name correctly. But it's a poem called All Hallows. And I love it. I think it's really, really good. Part of the reason I wanted to do this podcast, by the way, was to actually find other poems, put myself out of my comfort zone a little bit. So, All Hallows by Louise Glück. I'm just going to read it for you right now, and before I do, I'll just walk a little bit further through this marshy bit of land here. The dog's sort of struggling to keep up here, but he is getting a little bit chonky, aren't you, boy? Yes, we know. And the sun is just sort of kissing the very tops of the trees right now. And where I am, only about 4 of them are properly autumnal, I'd say, where their leaves have turned to fire. But there's that chill in the air that tells you, without telling you, that it is the turn of the season. I would have come out here late at night and maybe done something a bit spookier, but I'm not sure I can quite handle it. So here we are. This is All Hallows by Louise Glück. Even now this landscape is assembling. The hills darken, the oxen sleep in their blue yoke, the fields having been picked clean, the sheaves bound evenly and piled at the roadside among cinquefoil as the toothed moon rises. This is the barrenness of harvest or pestilence. And the wife, leaning out the window with her hand extended as in payment, and the seeds distinct, gold, calling, come here, little one. And the soul creeps out of the tree. It's a strange one, this poem, because it is different to anything else I thought I might end up covering, and I also really must confess I knew nothing about Louise Glück. I know that she only passed very, very recently, but obviously had a phenomenal career. We don't really get taught about the American poets in the UK system, and certainly I don't really have to teach them. More's the pity, really, because the States have punched well above their weight in terms of all things literature over the years, and poetry being no exception. So just to talk about the poem in some sort of detail, the first stanza sort of describes this pastoral scene, and it's quite fitting really where I'm stood. The next field beyond me is in fact full, not of oxen but of cows, all sort of resting in the late afternoon light, although they don't look anywhere near as tired as the ones in this particular one. And as you can hear, the dog is charging around next to me on the bridge. This idea that we got this description of it, I don't know, there's like a nice contrast of darkness and light throughout the whole thing, and the fields themselves being picked clean links to what I said about the harvest. But there is also something quite sort of potentially gothic and a bit dark, the idea of a body or a bone having been picked clean as well. And again, linking with this idea of, at one point we really relied entirely on the harvest. In fact, to a certain point we still do. Let's not sort of stand around and say that we're beyond that now. Agriculture is still a huge thing, and with threats to humanity such as, war, doing things like certainly the war in Ukraine, changing the way that we have to think about grain, one of the largest exporters of grain in Europe, and then you take the never-ending fear of climate change and things not being able to grow. We're still 3 good meals away from anarchy. And so the idea that a very real fear that people would have faced every single year was the harvest any good? If the harvest was bountiful, you might relax a bit more at this time of year, knowing that you had enough to get through the harsh winter. If your harvest was bad, you were starting to get very, very nervous indeed as the nights drew in. So this primal fear does sort of come in as well. So we talk about these crops and the sort of sheaves and this cinquefoil. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm pronouncing it cinque in the sort of French way. The kind of yellow flower apparently, and was sort of in amongst all of the crops here. But then we get this toothed moon. I said toothed in the reading. I've been doing a lot of Shakespeare recently. That might be why. Toothed or toothed. It kind of amounts to the same thing. This sense of something canine, something wolfish, rising into the sky. We've had this incredible supermoon recently, the harvest moon, which I've always loved this time of year. It looks absolutely gigantic when it comes up. Originally, I really wanted to record this under a full moon, but I got scared, if I'm completely honest. To be honest, once we get into sundown in the Riley household these days, I am needed to do far more prosaic things like making sure that I've made dinner and making sure that I've given our little girl a bath and all those things. So, poetic inspiration under moonlight might have to wait for a little while. I'm glad I'm doing this in daylight, because it does add to that sense of the changing of a landscape. And then we get this lovely line: "This is the barrenness of harvest or pestilence." And so we get a nice journey from the outside into the inside, really. You know, we're the barren fields are sort of thrown aside, really, to then go into this wife leaning out the window, extending her hand as in payment, and the seeds are like gold. So we get this great contrast here between who is this person, but also why is there a transaction happening here. And it seems quite obvious to me, and doing a little bit of a skinny of some analysis, that this is also a metaphor for childbearing. Something, this idea of if you have a bountiful harvest, some of it is down entirely to luck and circumstance, some of it cannot be helped. So there's a good contrast here between that, and this female figure staring at the window is both sinister and sympathetic at the same time. Back in the summer, we took a trip to Boscastle down North Cornwall way. We went to the Boscastle Witch Museum, Witch and Magic Museum. Fascinating stuff. And looked at the idea of some of the really graphic stuff, like the homunculus, but also things like the poppet, some sort of doll figurine that could be made. Some of it, of course, with human sort of bits in it. I mean, this stuff turns my stomach on a pure sort of visceral level. But I won't lie, I find witchcraft as a concept incredibly alluring and frightening. I'm not religious at all, as I've mentioned a few times, but there's something about it, because I think that before we worshipped deities, we worshipped something far more tangible. We worshipped the earth, really. We worshipped what we could see, what we could sort of feel, and what we could taste, which makes a lot of sense, really, when you think about it. We, as humans, have sought to find meaning. Why did this particular crop grow and that one did not? Why did that happen? And of course, now scientifically we can sort of explain it, but there's still an element of luck involved in it, and I don't think anyone really likes to admit that. The same as why some people are able to have 5 children, seemingly at no real issue at all to them, and others struggle. In some respects, there's a part of me that wonders if some of this is a summoning ritual. I kind of like the idea that it might be. That possibly the woman in this is at the end of her tether and is really trying in any way she can to make sure that she has a child. And is almost maybe asked or cast some sort of incantation that means that something will, at the right time, be summoned for her. Now, I've always thought that maybe, since reading this, that is what the last line is all about. A last line that gives me the creeps, by the way. It's wonderfully written. And also the parts in italics, come here. The sense of drawing one near, and the soul creeps out of the tree. Again, I think we're fortunate right now in terms of our culture, is that folk horror, as it were, or even just interest in folk sort of stuff, has never been more pronounced. We've had the sort of neo folk stuff of things like Midsummer, Ari Aster films, and we've had a lot more interest in the idea of Wicca and tarot and all that sort of stuff. I teach Macbeth every single year, and for the first time this past couple of years, I've been teaching it to kids who actually understand the concept of the difference between black and white magic and all of that. Because for me, the biggest fear I have about anything witchcraft related isn't actually to do with magic; it's to do with people. it's to do with what would somebody do if they believed this would give them what they needed and they required some sort of sacrifice for it. Although I think if you look in history, the real people that always had something to fear were women, who could be accused at any time of being witches by men that didn't like them. And I always start off my lessons about Macbeth whenever we cover the witches to say, how many people here take aspirin or ibuprofen when they've got pain? How many people here might, take an over-the-counter drug and they don't even think about it? They don't think about what's in there. They just take it. Well, at one point in history, people would seek out the local healer, somebody who had knowledge of what plants and herbs and roots could actually do to a human body, and a lot of them are still very much in place. I asked them, how many of you have ever had ginger when you've had an upset stomach, or have taken some sort of lemon-based thing when you've been feeling unwell around the sinuses? These are all things that can help a person, but because it was mainly women doing them, it was very easy to persecute them for knowing too much. Anyway, I digress. In terms of the spookiness of this poem, and I will be doing a couple of spooky ones in the lead up to Halloween. This is the first of a few, I think. I like the idea that it isn't cartoonish. It's very real. It's beautifully written. It's in a free verse form where there are no obvious rhymes or obvious meter going on here, but there's a bit of half rhyme going on. We've got a nice bit of anaphora with the come here and come here, and those things can be unsettling in their own sense. The witches in Macbeth speak in what's it called now? It's a trochaic tetrameter, where we have a beat of 7 or 8 depending on the line. It's designed to be unsettling. It's designed to get on some level us feeling unsettled by it, and it is unsettling, but like a lot of good things, that's okay. Unsettling is appropriate at this point. And the idea of somebody looking out at the landscape the way that it is, I think that you don't have to be in any way supernatural, or you don't have to have an interest in the supernatural if you like Halloween and this time of year. If nothing else, it's a time of change, a time of transition, a time of moving into the darker part of the year, hopefully with a sense of provision. Maybe not literal, but within your heart. I really struggle with the change of seasons. It makes me quite sort of down at times, but I do like this time of year. There's a sense of this is the end of this year when it comes to the sun. Not that we had a lot of sun this year, but the end of the sun, the end of the sort of bright times, but also a time of something different. I love the smell of mulch leaves and earth and potentially a distant wood fire. Those are the smells of autumn, not bloody Starbucks putting a bit of cinnamon in my coffee. That is nice as well in its own way. Yeah, to each their own, I say. So, bit more of a sketch than usual. I'm not saying that I'm not as confident with this poem, but it is one that I've only really read a couple of times, and I'm sort of reading it while out and about right now, and I'm just saying what is coming to the top of my head. But please do go away and read it, and if you have any thoughts or comments, anything you think I've missed, please do get in touch. And if nothing else, it's a damn good poem to read at this time of year. It has everything that you need: spookiness, pastoral imagery, potential childbirth imagery, and of course that hint at the end of something very supernatural happening. But what? We don't really know. If you want to hear something spooky as well, I've got a couple lined up, locked and loaded, but if there's one that you think, oh, he has to cover that, please do get in touch. It's that time of year when I like to make sure I've got all things a bit spooky and a bit paranormal sort of lined up to make sure that I can do it justice. I might even get over my own fear of the dark and come out and do a very spooky poem by moonlight, but I make no promises. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I've been Joe Riley, I'm the Sketch Poet, and I hope you have a very nice evening.